The Doctor Who decks are just about out, and I've had a lot of fun theory crafting a lot of decks revolving around the new legendary creatures. There are a whopping 76 new potential commanders among the 4 decks, which is just an insane number. I may end up making several videos about the Doctor Who cards, but one question popped up in my mind that I just couldn't ignore. There are 15 versions of the Doctor and 26 different companions that can be their second commander. That is 390 different possible permutations of these commanders. That is not very high when you compare it to the partner commanders, but it is still quite a big number. I want to answer this. For each Doctor, what is their universally strongest companion? Let's get started. But first, some ground rules. At first, I considered that I may only want to consider the colors of companions that do not already match one of the Doctor's 2 colors. But I think, in the end, 2-color decks are fine and can be just as strong or even stronger than 3-color decks given the right companion. Second, I recognize that some of the Doctors may favor certain strategies while some are particularly broad. I'm going to do my best to round down the best companion down to a single option for each Doctor, but if there are any others that I feel like may match up well, I'll briefly list them and not go into too much detail. I will acknowledge though that you could build any of these Doctors with any of these companions and make the deck whatever you want it to be. I'm just looking for something that synergizes well together and isn't two clashing ideas. The only other ground rule that I have is that I have to acknowledge how strong and ubiquitous Clara Oswald is. You could easily pair Clara with almost every one of these commanders and make it very strong, doubling any of their triggers and choosing whatever extra color you want. I am probably going to mention Clara a lot as a potential companion, but I am going to try to not make them the primary companion choice if there are others that would do just as well or better. The first Doctor finds the TARDIS when it enters and will pump up an artifact or creature when you cascade. The TARDIS, naturally, will give cascade to the next spell that you cast after it attacks. It also cares about plane chase, but I'm going to ignore that bit for the purposes of this exercise. So, interestingly, we don't need to have a focus on cascade to build this deck, but I would suggest and suspect that Cascade is one of the best strategies to have with the first Doctor, as the synergy already exists there. So we're looking for 2 things here: a suitable color that works well with the Cascade strategy, and a companion that supports Cascade, either in casting things from exile or some other way. Looking over our available options for Cascade just in cards that already exist, it appears that either red or green would be a great addition to the Azorius Commander color identity. And after searching, there are a couple of clear standouts. My pick for the first Doctor is going to be Ryan Sinclair. He's red, and he's got 2 things going for him. He does this pseudo cascade thing whenever he attacks, which can find you more spells to cast, and the first Doctor can pump him to make his ability more effective. So if you're looking to build a cascade deck with the first Doctor, I'd recommend pairing him with Ryan Sinclair. Now, I recognize that Ryan doesn't actually do cascade with his ability. It's just something like cascade, but I think you can argue that this lends itself to kind of a spellslinger build that uses Cascade as its main engine. Other great options are Yasmin Khan, which can get Cascade spells off of the top of the deck, Graham O'Brien, who can make you food whenever you Cascade, and Susan Foreman, who synergizes with the TARDIS's other ability to planeswalk, and then, of course, Clara Oswald, who can double the +1/+1 counter triggers. Next, the second Doctor gives a choice to all players. They may draw a card if they choose not to attack you. This strategy I have seen work very well in Orzhov colors, especially with the Silver Quill decks from Strixhaven. So my first inclination is to look towards potential black-colored companions. This deck wants to be political, so let's find a good political companion. I think the biggest way that you can lean into that political game with this commander is to go with our sole black companion, Vizlor Turlo. Vizlor is cool because he can either become a great card engine for you or a great card engine for someone else, but it's punishing either way. You can play this to your advantage as a political bargain, and then in the deck play cards that benefit off of your opponents either having a lot of cards or drawing a lot of cards. Vizlor seems like a great fit for the second Doctor. The other options I considered were Leela, who would benefit off of your opponent's draws, and either Clara Oswald or Adric for doubling that trigger that he has. The reason why I didn't go with each is because doubling the draw trigger would have a sort of backwards effect. Your opponents would get a card for free with no additional advantage for you other than the card that you draw for yourself. They can't not attack you twice. And for Leela, I feel that while this would make a harder choice for your opponents, they're more likely to draw into removal for Leela, and again, the politics would have a backwards effect. The Third Doctor is just a big beater. He wants you to have a lot of non-creature tokens, so clues, foods, and treasures usually, but you could also go with something like blood tokens or incubator tokens or roll tokens or anything of that sort. I think in general the most support is going to come from artifact tokens, so let's try to pick a companion that either helps you make those tokens or takes advantage of having tokens. Another thing to look out for is a companion who would support our main game plan of swinging with the Doctor, who is going to be massive if we can get away with the sheer number of tokens we're planning to have. There are a lot of great options for this commander. I narrowed the list of companions down to 9 potential candidates. In the end, my pick is Tegan Jovanka. When you attack, Tegan can give the Doctor indestructible and +1/+1 until end of turn. That is going to help you beat down your opponent even more. This makes a Bant deck, and Bant is fantastic at both Voltron style play and making clue and treasure tokens. There is still so much flexibility with this, and I feel like Tegan helps the Third Doctor a lot. That said, it was a hard choice. The ones I had to pass up were Romana 2, who makes more tokens to pump up the Doctor, Sarah Jane Smith, who also makes tokens and is a good choice if leaning into the historic theme, K9 Mark 1, who makes the Doctor unblockable and harder to target, Martha Jones, who makes a clue herself and makes the Doctor unblockable, as well as synergizing with the clue strategy, Nissa of Traken, who can draw cards from sacking your artifacts, Dan Lewis, who can turn your artifact tokens into equipment that can make the Doctor even stronger, Ace, who can clear up opposing blockers by fighting them, and Clara Oswald, who can double the ETB trigger and potentially lend itself to a strong blink game if you want to go in that direction. The Fourth Doctor does 2 things. It makes historic spells castable from the top of your library, and it makes food when you do it. So a companion would either synergize with the artifact tokens, like the Third Doctor did, or synergize more with the historic spells. To me, Sarah Jane Smith is the obvious choice. Once per turn, she investigates when you cast a historic spell. That means you're getting a food token and a clue token once per turn. That's a strong synergy, and you can easily make a strong historic focused deck with clue and food payoffs in Bant. The only other option I could think of that would lend itself well to the game plan is Grandma Breen, who would make food whenever you cast a spell from the top. If you didn't want white and you didn't want to make clues and just fully focus on the food theme, then this is going to double your tokens effectively. Anyways, I feel like for this Doctor, as well as the 10th and 13th Doctors, it's going to be hard to argue with their choice of companion because they already have a good option as the other face commander for the decks that they come in. But we'll see if that holds true for the other ones when we get to them. The 5th Doctor is a really cool idea. It wants to make your creatures bigger and untap them, but only when you don't attack with them. This is going to be a very strong defensive build, where you want lots of creatures that benefit from being untapped or can tap for a strong ability multiple times in a turn. It feels like this wants to be a combo deck, and you can certainly take it that way, but let's see if there are any companions that fit this kind of defensive mold that the 5th Doctor is making. Interestingly, most of the companions want you to attack. The best pick I could see is one that shares a color with the Doctor already, Nardole Resourceful Cyborg. Nardole wants you to have a lot of counters on him, and he taps to make mana to cast non-creature spells. Nardole can get really big when paired up with the 5th Doctor, and that blue mana is going to be great for casting defensive counter spells and other interaction. I mean, Azorius is already a pretty good control color combination, so it's hard to improve on that with another color, and I think this is a pretty good fit, so my pick is Nardole. The other pick I was thinking of course, was Clara Oswald, who can double those counters and untap triggers, and can let you use another color if you wanted to add black to the control plan or something else. As I mentioned, Clara is incredibly ubiquitous, and it's hard to argue that it won't be a good choice here, but looking over all of the companions, there aren't a lot of them that support a defensive plan, and mostly want you to go on the attack. That's a smart thing to do in the precon decks. It makes the game not drag on, but it does mean our options for this commander are limited and it isn't as flexible. The 6th Doctor has probably the strongest ability among all of the Doctors. It can copy historic spells when you cast them once per turn. Doubling up on legendary creatures, sagas, and artifacts is a potent strategy, and one that will probably land a target on your back anyways, so who is going to support this deck the best? Another consideration is that if we get the 6th Doctor out first, we're probably going to be copying our companion, which is a really cool twist on this idea. For once though, Clara is a non-bow with this commander, because Clara causes triggers to trigger again, but the 6th Doctor's triggers only happen once per turn, meaning it can't happen again and Clara does nothing. For this, the decision came down to what kind of historic deck you want to make. Historic can go in multiple directions, but I feel like there isn't a great choice for general historic support. I'm going to have to pick Perry Brown for the most generally applicable. It helps you cast your one historic spell that's going to be copied, and it makes it convocable, which, if you're playing legendary creatures as the things you copy, would synergize pretty well. But since it applies to all historic spells, I feel like this has a slight leg up on the other options. And once again, Bant seems like a great color combo for this kind of deck. My other thoughts were Ian Chesterton, who would make a really strong saga deck and would help you get a ridiculous number of sagas, and Dan Lewis, who would be a strong artifact support because those additional artifacts could be attached to your creatures. Really, I feel like both of these options would make for fun designs, and I'm curious to see which strategy would net out to be the strongest between legendary creatures, artifacts, and sagas. The 7th Doctor, I feel like, must be a difficult one to build around. It wants to attack, it wants you to have a bunch of artifacts, and it wants to cast big stuff. Okay, maybe not that hard to build around. I anticipate the deck would want to be generating lots of treasures to cast the big stuff if you couldn't cast them with the Doctor's ability, and those are easy enough to manipulate as well. So who supports this the best? Interestingly, there aren't a lot of companions that support this better than Nissa of Traken. Nissa lets you sack any number of artifacts when you attack, which can help you manipulate that number so that you can trick your opponents. Plus, if you're going for treasures, sacrificing treasures for giving access to the Doctor to swing through, and for card draw is very good value for treasures. Yes, Nissa shares blue with the 7th Doctor, but I think Azorius is more than enough support to cast big stuff and to have tokens. Honorable mentions are Ace, who similarly frees up blockers and sacrifices an artifact, but it only does one of each. But it does add green to the color identity if you wanted that. Or, once again, Clara Oswald, who I think brings an interesting dimension by copying his ability because you can have a higher likelihood of casting the card that you want, as well as letting you go with whatever additional color you want. The 8th Doctor has a high mana cost and a powerful effect, letting you bring a historic permanent back from the graveyard on each of your turns. Because of the high mana cost, I expect this deck will have a lot of blink effects to make use of the Doctor multiple times, as well as heavy interaction, possibly in the form of those historic permanents and the abilities on them. So what should we add to this control-centric commander? My pick is Joe Grant. Joe lets you cycle any historic permanent, which can help you fill your graveyard with strong cards that you can cast later with the Doctor. It helps with more card advantage and consistency, and it requires no additional build around to make strong. Other good companions are Ace, who can sacrifice artifacts to cast again, and Grandma Breen, who makes food whenever you cast from the graveyard, as well as Jamie McCrimmon, who, like Joe, can be a large force you can use to win your games by doing what the deck wants you to do anyways. Finally finished with the classic Doctors, now on to the next generation. The 9th Doctor had a strong ability doubling your upkeep as long as you're untapping him at your untap step. There are over 700 cards in the game that have upkeep triggers, and that's not counting cards with mechanics like Suspend that trigger at your upkeep. Suspend is clearly a way you could go, but I think that there are a lot of powerful effects that you can have by multiplying your upkeeps on your turn in such a cheap and consistent way. Which companion supports this the best? As it turns out, none of the other Doctor's companions care about the upkeep phase. We have a few that care about the end step and a lot that care about attacking, but upkeep is missed universally. So as long as you're making this upkeep focused deck, the best companion in this case is truly Clara Oswald, who can make it 3 upkeep steps at the beginning of your turn rather than just 2. Plus, Clara can add in whatever extra color you want. I saw a pretty strong version of this deck that added green and used cards like Bio-Waste Blob and Extravagant Replication. Such powerful synergy between these two commanders. If you're looking for more specific builds, I think Rose Tyler would be a great companion if you're going the suspended cards route. Otherwise, Clara seems like the gold standard for whatever direction this commander wants to go. The 10th Doctor is another one of the face commanders, and it really likes suspended cards and time counters. Time counters can be found on suspended cards, vanishing permanents, and various of the Doctor Who cards, clearly focused around supporting this commander. There really isn't much option when it comes to companions that care specifically about time counters, so Rose Tyler is the clear choice for a companion here. Not only does it add to the counters, it benefits from all of the things that you have with time counters on them. Rose was designed specifically with the 10th Doctor in mind, and so once again it makes sense that the best companion for the face commander is the other face commander. If you don't want to go Just Guide, then I would suggest looking towards either Graham O'Brien, who gives you food whenever you cast from exile. He seems to be coming up a lot in these secondary recommendations as well. He's particularly strong with the doctors in this set. We also have Adric, who can copy that time travel ability and give you 6 time travels in one activation. Or, of course, Clara Oswald, who can double up that attack trigger and get you 2 cards with every attack, as well as giving you the flexibility of color choice. The 11th Doctor is unique among the Doctors in that it wants you to deal combat damage rather than just attacking. That makes the focus of the deck at least partially to be around protecting the Doctor and making sure it can get through. Like the 10th Doctor, it gives suspend to a card that may not have had it prior, but it's a little bit worse because rather than just putting 3 counters on it, it puts time counters equal to the mana value of that card. He also has an ability that makes a creature with power 3 or less unblockable for only 2 mana, which you would think mostly applies to himself, but it can actually be used on any number of creatures. In my opinion, this is one of the weaker build-around cards, but let's see if we can get a companion that makes it better. Once again, I feel like flavor wins with this commander. Amy Pond seems to be the best choice. It also cares about dealing combat damage, and it helps you remove time counters from those cards that are going to have a higher number of time counters than if you were playing a 10th Doctor deck. Plus, Amy comes as a package with Rory, who casts itself into exile and is a fun little payoff to include. I think the deck is going to partially have a suspend theme, but mostly going to be focused on little creatures hitting with powerful effects and building a control type deck to help you win the game. Lots of companions fill a role with this one, but it didn't quite hit the mark like Amy did. We have K9, who can protect the Doctor and other legendaries and help him get through to your opponents. Rose Tyler, who again cares about those suspended cards. Vizsla Turlough, who can help you refill your hand and contribute to the control game. Donna Noble, who is another good protection to a commander that is swinging often. Graham O'Brien, who synergizes well with the suspend plan. And as always, Clara Oswald, who can get you 2 cards suspended from your hand with each hit from the Doctor. The 12th Doctor gives cards cast from anywhere other than your hand Demonstrate, an ability that lets you copy it at the price of an opponent also copying it. This is a fun bit of politicking, but the key thing about this is that you do have to build around this ability, as it doesn't have something that lets you cast cards from exile or the graveyard or the library on its own. The Doctor also gets bigger when you copy a spell, making it very much like a Varen deck. So what companion works best with this? Unfortunately, unless you want to play the food game, Graham is the only companion out of the Is It's colors that care about casting cards from anywhere other than your hand. Yes, Rose might be a good fit, but I'd rather find something that gives you an engine rather than just a payoff. I think Ryan Sinclair has to be the choice here again, simply because it will consistently give you a card that you can play so long as you are able to pump him up. That was a hard choice for me, as it feels like there are a lot of companions that almost do what we want with this, but mostly fall short. The Doctor may need to look toward the 98 to get the support it needs to make Demonstrate more powerful, and that just means we're building around a commander and it doesn't really have the support to work on its own, which is a sign of a weaker commander. Other possible companions could be Bill Potts, who is an engine for copying spells, although it doesn't give you spells that you can cast from exile. Clara Oswald, who copies that second ability, which isn't much, but can potentially give you a color that you need. Graham O'Brien, as I mentioned, to be caring about cards cast from outside your hand. Or Yasmin Khan, who can potentially get you a spell to cast from exile, assuming the top card of your library is a spell. As you can see, 3 out of the 5 options I've given here are in the red color, so I'm having a hard time giving this answer in confidence, while also introducing more diversity into the deck. Coming up on our last numbered Doctor, the 13th Doctor pumps up creatures when you cast from anywhere other than your hand, and at the end step, untaps creatures with a counter on them. That last ability alone makes for a pretty potent commander, and we could build around that just adding in cards that you can cast from exile or ways to make that happen. This begs the question, like the last Doctor, is there a good companion that can consistently get you what you want to trigger paradox abilities? Or would it be better just to focus on that part that doesn't care about that? There are a couple of companions that put counters on themselves, but none of them give counters to anyone else, so you're putting all your eggs in one basket. Part of me is tempted to make a color-driven choice here, adding in white because it's the best color identity to pair up with green and blue for the counter strategy. But I don't think there's a good enough companion there unless you're building something around historic spells or tokens, which might be too split-focused. The face commander that was paired with the 13th Doctor was Yasmin Khan, but as we mentioned before, you'd have to know what the top card was, and if it was a land, then the paradox trigger just doesn't do anything. But wait, something else to note is that once you do hit something that triggers it, you can give a counter to Yasmin, and then it untaps at the end step and you can use her ability again. I see now there's a synergy here specifically with creatures that untap, and potentially loading the deck with more of that kind of effect that Yasmin has to give it more consistency, as well as a lot of top deck manipulation. So after much consideration, my pick here is going to be Yasmin Khan. Other fun companions would be Clara Oswald, of course, who doubles both the Doctor's triggers, which could mean that you get double untapping at the end step for some creatures that could lead to a lot of free activations and really powerful effects. Another option is Ryan Sinclair for giving another way to exile spells, or perhaps Adric, who can copy the triggered ability multiple times per turn cycle with enough mana, if you're willing to play Simic colors only. This Doctor is a very interesting one, and one I feel could be explored a bit further, and I'm really happy now that I've thought a bit more about this and I can see the power of it as the face commander. We've come to the last two Doctors, ones that don't fall into the numbering scheme and are some of the best designed characters flavorfully in the show. These two don't have blue in their mana cost, which is a breath of fresh air, and I'm excited to see where they lead us. The War Doctor, the first of these two, gives time counters when anything phases out or are put into exile, then deals damage equal to the number of time counters on it to any target whenever it attacks. That is a very strong ability on its own, and the deck clearly wants you to use cards that phase other cards out, as well as exiling things, not even caring if they come back. Does any companion support this? None of the companions care specifically about phasing, and the few that will exile cards consistently seem like one-time effects on your turn. I'll bypass Clara with this one for a potentially controversial pick, K9 Mark 1. Why? I think K9's ability to protect the Doctor is going to be very helpful in keeping it around. Making the Doctor unblockable is a solid strategy as well, and it's going to be swinging as often as possible to get that damage in. And it's blue, which adds back that color that it took away by not being one of the numbered Doctors. But I do feel like being able to protect the commander is key to this build, and blue will help in making the deck more controlling and consistent. Other good options are Clara, of course, because Clara will double the number of counters that are being put on the commander and will deal twice the amount of damage when he attacks, essentially quadrupling the amount of damage he would normally be doing. Or a card that gives you consistent exiling abilities such as Ryan Sinclair or Yasmin Khan would help the War Doctor with even more power. And last, we have the Fugitive Doctor, who makes a clue token when it enters, and it gives an instant or sorcery in the graveyard flashback whenever you attack and sacrifice a clue. You unfortunately are going to be focusing on clue tokens with this commander, but that flashback cost is set to 4 mana, and that can be used to hit some pretty big spells. A deck focused around generating clue tokens and cheating out big spells will go far with this commander. The original 8 Doctors companions care more about artifact tokens, but unfortunately only one of them actually generates those clue tokens, and that's Sarah Jane Smith, who also wants you to play a historic theme, and that might not work in your big spell plan. So instead of including an engine for clue tokens, I'm going to add in the color that does best with clue tokens, which is once again blue, and add a companion that we've only mentioned one other time as a potential fit, and that's Martha Jones. Martha also investigates when it enters, but it gives a great sidekick ability in giving itself and another creature unblockable whenever you sacrifice a clue. That means that if you have both of these out, the Doctor is going to be able to get through unscathed as long as it has clues to feed it. I think Teamer will work well enough at getting these clues out, and having many options for big spells. Other companions I've considered were Romana 2, who can copy those clue tokens if you already had them, but I feel like this is probably too weak just by virtue of forcing you to play Naya. And potentially Graham O'Brien, who cares about when those cards are being cast from the graveyard, but doesn't generate you the correct type of token for the commander. I feel, once again, like this is a hard one to build around, but it's got potential to be explosive, as Gruul or Temur Spellslinger decks tend to be. We've done it! Looking back at my picks, a couple things surprised me. First, I honestly didn't expect that the Faced companions would all pair up better than any of the other companions to their respective Faced commander. It makes so much sense, but the thought that they were designed better than any other companion still takes me by surprise. Second, I thought it would be harder to find companions that worked better than Clara Oswald, because it can be any color, and because the triggering abilities being copyable is very strong. And indeed, 11 out of the 15 Doctors, I did find that Clara works well with them, and one of them I did determine was the strongest, but except for that one case, Clara was outmatched by something else that had the potential to synergize even better with the commander. And I'm really happy to say that, because promoting diversity with these decks is super important. I don't want to sit across from a Doctor Who deck and expect that Clara is always going to be the companion. And I think that that possibility exists far more now than I did before I started this video. Third, every single companion had a chance to synergize well with a particular commander with the exception of one, Barbara Wright. Barbara, initially, I thought would be the stronger of the two Sagas Matter companions, but the Doctors that cared about Sagas wanted a clear direction to go, and Ian providing that replicatability was more important for those commanders. I think if you're considering building one of the historic Matters Doctors because you want to play Sagas, Barbara is a great choice because read ahead is crazy with certain Sagas. I think you're likely to find Barbara in the 99 of a lot of Saga decks in the near future. Fourth, I thought for sure that there would be more duplication between the companions that I chose, like there was a standout winner, maybe not Clara, potentially others. But if you would have told me that the only companion I used twice as the top pick was Ryan Sinclair, I would not have believed you. I'm excited that I could be proven wrong in that regards, because again, this shows the complexity of the design of these commanders. Alright, enough rambling on. Thank you so much for watching this video. If any of these 15 deck ideas sparked your interest and you would want me to make a video about them, a deck tech, whatever, let me know in the comments. I may try to build a few of these decks myself and post deck takes on them on the channel. Like I said in the beginning, there are 76 commanders in the set, and so not even half of them are taken up by the Doctor and their companions, and there are a lot of other avenues to explore. Tune in for the next EDH video, and thank you so much for watching.